Hello and welcome to the MB Om podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the MBO podcast. I'm really excited for today's episode. I have special guest and yoga educator Jules Mitchell here. And Jules is somebody that I found out about through a yoga teacher that I know in Atlanta. And I checked out her website and I was really fascinated with her background in biomechanics. And it's something that I don't know too much about, but I find that the more that I teach, the more fascination I have with the actual physical structure of the body and then movement within the body. And so the more people that I can connect with who are aligned with the movement aspect of yoga, the better, in my opinion. And on top of that, she's created a really successful business for herself. She's constantly traveling to teach. So a really great background in retreats and creating her own brand and moving away from teaching the standard scheduled classes at a studio and doing more one-on-one privates and creating workshops and retreats that are based off of that. And then she's also releasing her first book really shortly on the biomechanics of yoga. So super, super cool. I won't tell you guys anything more. We'll dive right into the interview. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today, Jules. It's awesome to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I was thinking we'd start with if you could tell me a little bit about how you got into yoga.
I got into yoga. I didn't actually get into it. I've just always been with yoga. I don't even know how to explain that. I think I took my first formal yoga class in college, and it was familiar. It was something I had already done. And then I had memories of going to yoga with my mom when I was a little kid, but I don't know if those are real memories. You know how memory isn't very reliable. So yeah. I don't know if I just created that or if I had dreamt it or something. But the point is that yoga just has always been a part of me. So the experience I had when I went to my first formal class sucked me in, and I knew yoga would be a part of my life always. I think the first thing we did was legs up the wall. And it was about 20 minutes, I guess, of legs up the wall. Maybe it was only 5, but it felt like 20.
Yeah.
And I giggled the entire time, the entire way through, because at age 19 or something, I'd never been asked to be with myself. And it was so uncomfortable and awkward that my response was just to laugh.
Yeah.
And it took, the whole legs up the wall to settle me. And then I was in forever.
That's amazing. That's a cool story. Mm-hmm. It's interesting when you first go inwards and you check in how uncomfortable it is, even though we live in this physical body all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so how long did you practice for before you decided that you wanted to be a teacher?
I don't know, because it wasn't I guess that was well over a decade. But I wasn't a devout practitioner. I was in college. So, and then after that I had jobs and I worked strange shifts. And so, yoga wasn't I wouldn't go to my favorite class every week. It was it would enter my life and I'd go every day for a month, and then things would happen and I wouldn't go for 3 months. And, it was just kind of I enjoyed it, but I wasn't a yoga addict. And then my mom passed away, and that's when I became addicted to yoga, so to speak. I think I just transferred the loss and some devastation. I just transferred it into being obsessive about one thing. And I think that's a really common theme in yoga. I think we don't tend to talk about it very often, but I see it a lot. We find peace in it, and then we just obsess about it. And so that's pretty much what happened. That was around 2003. And then I knew I was on the path to start teaching right away. So I guess that would be about a decade, a little bit more.
Yeah, that's awesome. Was yoga sort of your way of healing and grieving?
Yeah, like I'd go to Shavasana and I would actually cry. Like I didn't have time, to cry in the regular life. So it was like I needed it. I needed to go. And then it just like took over and was an obsession. And then it took me another decade to let go of the obsession. And that was actually an interesting story. That was my boyfriend at the time when we started dating. He was pointed out to me my obsession, and I was really angry because he didn't understand. And after like a couple weeks of being super pissed at him, then I was actually able to see and hear him. And he was luckily very patient and knew what I was doing. I was just rejecting his idea. Yeah. And then I slowly started unraveling the process of being, addicted to this asana practice. And now I'm like very well balanced. I practice yoga, but I also practice all kinds of other things and, engage in lots of different activities, and it doesn't run my life anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of interesting because you do see that a lot, especially with the physical practice of yoga. You see people who are just like, I have to practice yoga today the same way they're like that with CrossFit or the gym and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Is that something in your teaching or you're educating with other people that you try to make them aware of? Is that being obsessive with yoga can also be unhealthy?
I don't actually run in circles anymore with people that are obsessed with yoga. I think, you kind of seek company that supports your agenda.
Yeah.
And so, like I work with private clients and they're regular people who do regular things. And, I work with a lot of teachers, and I think the teachers that are naturally drawn to me because of the fact that I introduced biomechanics into yoga. And so I break a lot of the yoga rules. I think the teachers that want to learn from me and that are drawn to me are already on that other side of the fence. It's not a common thing for me to see in my world. I do see it out in, the world beyond my circle and beyond my view,
And so it's not something that you feel like you need to like influence people to do differently. It's just something that people will come to you who kind of need your teaching style.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I just I don't have a background in psychology. So, I'm dealing with my own stuff. So I just my teaching of yoga is very specific to what I'm trained to do. And I actually think that that's one of the beauties and one of the downfalls of yoga practice as a whole is that it can mean so many different things to so many different people. Mm-hmm. And I think when you're a new teacher, I know especially myself, you think you have to teach it all. And that kind of includes like guiding people on, what's going on in their life. And now that I've progressed in one field, that's not, psychology is not my field. It's not really my place to psychoanalyze somebody's practice and what they need it for. So I just stay out of that because there's plenty of other leaders in the yoga community that speak to that specifically and have training in that and can handle it with maturity and complexity that I probably wouldn't be able to, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I really believe that when it comes to a vast practice like yoga, that specialization can be a benefit, as long as we recognize that we're specialized and then are willing to, refer out when it's beyond our scope, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because yoga is, you do like a 200-hour training and you kind of just skim the surface with yoga. Like you really you don't know.
You don't know anything.
Yeah, it's this thing where it seems like this big accomplishment, and it is, like, it's amazing. Mm-hmm. But then you start teaching and you realize that there's so much that you don't know about the body, about the philosophy of yoga, mm-hmm. about the actual act of teaching, and then it's like, whoa, this practice is so deep.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And so that was something that you struggled with when you first started teaching? Was this like, I need to know everything, or?
I don't think I struggled with it. I just thought I did, so like if you could look at my bookshelf, I have everything from chakras to Sanskrit. I took Sanskrit courses to, the sound, like, mantras, all this stuff. And it was all part of my learning. And I think I was just trying to figure out what kind of yoga teacher I wanted to be. Mm-hmm. I loved kirtan. And at the same time, I loved anatomy. And it's, to specialize in those two in a single lifetime is, pretty remarkable. Yeah. And so I just was like, I was testing all of it. It was like I was just sampling and kind of picking and choosing what my calling was. And I didn't know at the time. And then it ended up being biomechanics. And so now I actually really teach from that framework. I've really left out the other stuff, and not that I don't think it's important or valuable, but once again, for me to teach a class on chakras today would be completely inauthentic. Just because I understand it doesn't mean it's what I specialize in. So for example, I just did a 300-hour training, and so because it was 300 hours, we have to touch on everything. So we did, we touched a little bit on pranayama, and it was very biomechanics focused, but, a little on pranayama, a little on chakras, a little on Sanskrit. And I was like, look, this is all the education I have on this. And I'm just introducing it to you because if you think that you want to specialize in this, then you need to go out and get further education because you're not going to get it in a 300-hour. Like you said, you're not going to get it in a 200-hour.
Yeah.
So I have a big enough background that I can give all of those flavors, but if you want a 300-hour heavy on kirtan, you won't come to my training. You'll go to someone else's, and hopefully they can just give you a little teaser of biomechanics, just enough that they can send you out for further study.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good point because it's something that I've experienced as a teacher is it's like there's all this information and which path do I choose to go in, and I feel like I'm kind of at the point with my own teaching right now where I'm kind of like testing the waters with different things to figure out exactly what I want to do. So it's cool to hear that that's a path that you went on as well.
Yeah, I hopefully it's a path that we all go on. Maybe not, but I think that it helps you find kind of your dharma. What is it that you're meant to do? Mm-hmm. And so for that, you have to try different things.
Yeah, definitely. At what point did you find biomechanics? Like, how did you discover that aspect of yoga?
I didn't get it in yoga. Just to be very clear, that is actually one area in yoga that is sorely lacking, in my opinion. I know that there will be listeners that will say biomechanics doesn't make you a better yoga teacher. That's an argument I hear a lot. And to each his own, to each her own. But I found biomechanics through, academia. I was looking for a graduate program, and there's lots and lots of stuff that led up to that. But I was looking for a graduate program, and I lived in Nevada at the time, and so I looked at UNLV and went to meet with the professor. She's actually Dr. Gabriel Wolf. She's in motor control, but I went to speak with her. She's also their graduate advisor. And I was like, I'm really interested in kinesiology, but I don't have a big biology background, but I did have an engineering background. And she was like, wait, you have an engineering background? Like, this is incredible. Most of our graduate students struggle the most in the physics and biomechanics courses because that's a lot of math and a lot of engineering type stuff that people generally aren't that great at, especially in kinesiology. Like, those are movers, And so she was like, don't even worry about it. You're actually farther ahead than most. You'll have to make up some biology, but you'll be fine. And so I was like, oh, cool. I had never even really considered biomechanics. I didn't even really realize it was part of the program. I just knew kinesiology. And so that was kind of my first introduction to it. And then I ended up applying, getting accepted, and moving to California. So I had to reapply in California. Yeah. Long story. But so then that was pretty much what my degree was in. It was exercise science with a focus in biomechanics, my master's degree.
Oh, okay, cool. And for listeners out there who are not really certain as to what biomechanics entails, can you give like a brief description of what biomechanics is?
Yeah, absolutely. Biomechanics is how forces affect movement, or just the body, depending on the context. But so in the context of yoga, biomechanics is how forces affect the body in asana, in the human body in asana. So it involves a lot of different fields. It's actually a quite expansive field. And, you have to know some anatomy. You have to know some histology, which is like how tissues are made, what comprises the tissue. You have to know a little bit of physics, because when you're calculating loads, you're doing some Newtonian physics. You have to know a little bit of fluid dynamics, because the body's a fluid system. A little bit of cellular biology, all kinds of little things. So it's really mostly on how the body adapts to loading and, loading thresholds. Too much is injury, too little is also injury prone. Yeah. And it's kind of that right amount.
Awesome. That sounds, It sounds like it's a bit of a complicated area.
It is. It's very complicated, especially because it's moving very quickly, and there's a lot of emerging concepts and ideas that are challenging some classical ideas, I would say. And so that even kind of shows up in yoga. I think a lot of yoga and the instructions in yoga have been sort of come down through like a PT lineage and a corrective exercise lineage. And there's a lot of research now saying that the stuff that we're reading in those texts is actually not as cut and dry as we thought. And so it's a really exciting field. I think in 30 to 50 years, the way we explain movement is going to be completely shifted.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like there's already been a shift, like even since I started practicing yoga in like 2008, I feel like there's been a big shift in more like movement than just, for a lot of teachers, than just, pushing students through practice. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious how you went from having this master's in biomechanics. How did you incorporate that into your teaching?
Yeah, that was a tough one, because after coming out with a degree, an advanced degree in science, you get to a point where you need evidence to do anything, and there is no yoga research. And so it was like, how am I going to translate this into yoga and know that it's actually legit, because there's no research on this.
Yeah.
So that was a challenge. And it was a challenge enough that it almost, quieted me, silenced me, because I was almost paralyzed at, I don't know what to do now. But I just stuck with it, and it just kind of eventually took on a shape of its own. I did a lot of experimenting, and, fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of my experimenting was captured for online yoga. So I have some like great online classes out there, and I have some not so great online classes out there that are me just kind of like, well, let's see what happens when I give this cue, and let's see how they feel, and let's see if, how it works. And, so, for better or worse, I guess it's, internet captures everything.
Yeah, definitely.
But that's okay. Like I don't expect to have everything right all of the time. So, I just, sampled a little bit, tried it in my own body. And the most important thing is that I think I just introduced the concept of variability. And I think that was one thing that yoga was lacking a lot. It was like, this is exactly how you do the pose. Your knee must be directly over the ankle. Your knee must be pointing directly over the second and third toe. That's the safest way. And if you I'm actually going to try and write a blog on this soon, but if you look at sports, that's ridiculous. You know what I mean? I went to a Kings game. I live in LA, and watched that hockey goalie. His knees are not right over his ankles. He can do amazing things, that hockey goalie. And so it's like, at what point are we doing our students a disservice by only letting them take these specific shapes and never letting them be allowed to veer beyond them? Because how is that real life? How is it when you're packing your boxes to move? Are you always putting your knee directly over the ankle? So I think that those were where the questions came up. And so I just had to look at sports science and be like, how can I apply this to yoga? How can we introduce variability and still keep it within a safe confine? Like I said, there's loading, and then there's overloading. So how do we keep it so that they're still safe, but they're adapting to a variety of ways the posture could look?
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense to me. I guess it's one of those things, because you're not really taught that in most teacher trainings, that teachers continue to pass on this, keep the knee stacked over the ankle, because your biggest thing as a teacher is yoga should be healing, not hurting. And you see somebody, leaning too far into it, maybe it feels fine for them, but is it going to feel fine if they do it every day for 5 years?
Well, and I think that's the question there. The question is, so kind of my approach is their knee rolling in because they don't have any other choices? Now that's a problem. Right. So of course, so like when I teach, I'm like, you should always get find your neutral alignment, that's in air quotes first, and then veer from there, so it's like, because that's of course the hardest thing. You can't teach this in your 200 hour because it's too much. You have to actually understand biomechanics, anatomy, histology. You have to understand all that before you can start making choices to think outside the box. Right.
Yeah, definitely.
And so you shouldn't lose alignment. Like you should absolutely learn the alignment. But then as you continue, you've been teaching for 15, 20 years and you've expanded your knowledge, then you should have the confidence and the education to take it a little further. So again, is this person knee caving in because they have no other options? That's a problem. You should have a variety of options. And so that's kind of my approach is like, if you can get it aligned in the right, air quote, right way, now can we challenge you? Can we take you far to the left and far to the right of center? Yeah. And that's more useful in an everyday life scenario.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's awesome. That's really cool that you're incorporating that into classes.
Thanks.
And in terms of like bringing that into teacher trainings, how do you break it down onto like a more understandable level, or I guess like a more basic level for people who don't have the background with biology, physics, etc.?
I focus a little bit on load and spend, I have a good 8-hour PowerPoint where I really talk about, it's like a crash course in biomechanics, so to speak. And then so I always introduce that. And then I guess I shy away from forcing people to memorize anatomy. I think that memorizing anatomy it's fun and wonderful, but it can lead you into, especially if you're using a book, it can lead you into this sort of linear idea. And even if we're looking at the knee, you're looking at the book and you think it's a hinge joint and, you don't see that it has some rotation. And so I encourage people to think a little bit more about how loads affect the body and adaptation and less about the rules of anatomy. And, that to me is makes a successful teacher. You don't have to get bogged down with the rules. It's really a simple concept that the human body gets stronger when it faces loads. When we impose a load on a body, it increases its load bearing capacity. If you can get that, you don't need to know the name of every little bony structure. You don't, unless that's what you teach. If you teach anatomy, then you better learn it. But I think if you can just get that big concept, then you see that yoga, Pilates, weightlifting, running, all these other systems that are out there, gyrotonic, all these systems, they all do the same thing. They just load the body. And, if somebody comes to one system and they have these great experiences, it's because they're adding different types of load to their body. And so, it's like when you're dealing with these sort of specific practices, if you want to make them sustainable, lifelong practices, you also have to introduce variability to them. Because athletes don't have long careers, right?
Yeah.
Because they're not variable, but they're okay. They have $1 million contracts, so it's okay. They know that going into it, and it's worth it. But in yoga, it says we're constantly doing the same types of poses over and over. Maybe once in a while we should, load a little differently.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really cool. It's something that I'm really curious in is the way the body moves and how we should be moving it properly. So I feel like the more I teach, the more I'm like, that pose doesn't look right for that person. It's really hard in group classes to kind of capture that and work with that person.
That's the problem. I mean, if that you just said it right there. Group classes it makes it impossible to, and that's why, you, in the 200 hour, you learn alignment, because that's generally safe for most populations. Mm-hmm. And so that's, if that's the level of education you have, it's best to stay within that framework, so that you're not putting people at risk. But once you start working privately with people, that's when you can really start exploring.
Yeah. Yeah. So were you teaching group classes at one point, like in studios?
Yeah, I used to teach group classes. Yeah. That's how I started, because that's pretty much how you get into teaching, right? Yeah. So I taught group classes for, forever. And it was probably, it's been now 17, 18 months since I've taught a group class.
Wow.
Just because it just became between my private clients and, I travel almost every weekend to go teach somewhere, do yoga education. So between traveling on the weekends and my clients during the week, there was just no time to go teach at a studio. It just didn't fit. I mean, even, for the weekend, all the preparation, all the handouts, all of that stuff took so much time. So I stopped teaching group classes. Now I do teach them online. So I go and film once or twice a year for a few days at a time, and I film as many classes as I can fit in. It's usually like 20 classes or something, and then they get released online at a slow pace.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool. I'm curious about like the transition from teaching group classes to going more towards doing weekend workshops and trainings and that sort of thing. Did it sort of just happen organically, or was it something that you were pushing towards because your sort of like niche of teaching is more geared towards like smaller groups and one-on-one?
I think it just happened organically. I wish I could offer like a magic formula. I have taught weekend teacher training courses for a couple different companies. The most recent one was, my teacher, Leanne. So she had a teacher training that was a traveling teacher training. And so she had a few of us mentors that she would send out for certain ones. I actually even wrote one of her modules. And so like when that one would come up, I'd be the one to go teach it all the time. So I had a lot of training and a lot of experience in educating large groups. Mm-hmm. So it comes natural for me to speak in front of audiences. It always has. And so I think that added to the organic nature of it. When I was approached the first time to come teach a course, I was like, okay. And then I delivered. I know like a lot of my colleagues, I just spoke with one recently, and she's like, well, we got invited and I'm not so sure. And I was like, well, you should just do it, because that right there is going to keep you from it moving forward.
Yeah.
And so like for me, it was like somebody asked me to come teach. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. This is how I do it. It was just a very easy thing to do. And then, word of mouth, I guess, is just keeps going.
Yeah, for sure. I actually really like how you said that there's no like magic formula that you can provide for that, because sometimes I feel like it's really easy to start teaching and like want more right away and be like, I want to be doing workshops. I want to do trainings. How do I get into this? How do I get these gigs at, festivals or conferences and that sort of thing? And I think that there is a certain, level of like, you kind of have to, I'm thinking like put your time in. It doesn't feel like the right term, but it's kind of like you need to gain your knowledge before you can do that.
Like you mentioned a lot of things, like leading a 5-day teacher training for advanced continuing education is not the same thing as, going to a festival and things like that. So it's not that you need to get your knowledge. It's not that. It's that you just need to stay focused and committed. Like, whether it's more like, whether you're leading, like more workshops instead of more like education, there's a difference. I think there's one's not, better or worse. It's just sometimes you go to a workshop and you get a 2-hour asana class, and sometimes you go to a workshop and you get a PowerPoint, right? So like, all of them are good, and they're all ways of making money. And sometimes you go to a festival and the teacher, has 500 people in front of them. That's also a different skill set, with music playing and holding space for all these people. So you have to just kind of stick with what your skill set is and and put the time in, but just stay focused. I mean, this didn't just happen on accident. I put in a lot of schooling, a lot of research. I mean, you probably can't see but I have stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of research articles and books. I mean, I put some time into this, and then it unfolded organically. So if education is not your thing, like academia is expensive and time consuming, and it's not a requirement to be successful in the yoga industry, but whatever it is that your skill set is, that's what you should just stay committed to, and it should unfold.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that whole pile of things that I kind of lumped together. I think that you made a really good point. Teaching a training and teaching at a festival is definitely not the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And both good, both awesome. Just to be clear, it's just, I've taught at festivals, and it's not my most awesome skill set. I would prefer to leave that to people who can, rally large groups, and, I'd rather teach math. So I'd rather remind people about college algebra and how that applies to biomechanics, but I didn't know that. I taught at festivals for a while to see, that's what I mean. If you just stay committed to what feeds you, then it will continue to feed you.
Yeah. I love that too. And it's being honest with yourself. I think that there's a lot of, social media is great in a lot of ways, but it also kind of especially in the yoga industry, it kind of puts almost these expectations, I feel on yoga teachers that you should be a certain way, or your Instagram account should look a certain way, or you should be wanting something out of your career. And,
I agree.
Yeah. I think I love what you said, just continuing to be true to yourself, and there's nothing wrong with being I don't really perform my best at festivals.
Yeah. And then at that point, keeping your business within that, what you just said, if you go to my Instagram account, there's no pictures of me doing asana. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think those are awesome Instagram accounts, and I follow plenty of them. But it doesn't fit with my brand, so to speak. You know what I mean? So I posted today about a book that I had referred to a friend on evolution. That fits my brand, so I post about that. And so I think that if you try to mix too many things, then it gets kind of watered down, and no one's quite sure what your message is. My Facebook page it's all science. Sometimes it's yoga related, a lot of times it is, sometimes it's not. But I keep it very specific. It's people come to that page expecting a certain, viewpoint, because they can get all the other stuff on other pages, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't do that in the beginning. I didn't know, but I think as I got to recognize where I was going down my career path, then I started kind of streamlining the way I represent myself in the world to match that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think that that's really cool. Did you find that when you more streamlined, did you lose a following or clients that have been coming to your classes regularly?
I don't know, because it's kind of all happened together, where I stopped teaching classes. Definitely didn't lose clients, because my clients are regular people. They don't even follow yoga on social media, But yeah, I'm sure that people stopped following my page. I'm sure, I actually don't spend that much time on social media. So I don't really follow it that much. I kind of get on, and then I have other work to do.
Yeah.
But I'm sure, but that's okay. I think with social media, we get so hung up on how many likes can we get and how many followers can we get. And then there's a drop in dopamine when we lose a follower and whatever. And it's actually a good thing. People should, if they don't like your message, they shouldn't have to see it. It's actually better. You're better off people not agreeing with you, or not liking it, or just not being interested in it. You're better off with them going somewhere else. So I don't think it's a bad thing. It's just so hard because it's so detached. It's not a real person,
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think that that's a really great point. And I know my boyfriend and I have a travel podcast, and we've never spent a ton of time trying to get thousands and thousands of people to follow us on Twitter, because it seems like we'd rather have 100 people who actually like our tweets, and who are real people that we know behind there that are yes, we follow your podcast. And
agreed.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard because we go to get people who are bigger than us on the podcast, and they're like, well, you're not really that big on Twitter. And I'm like, well, do we need to be big on Twitter to be good enough for you?
And Twitter is really one of those. I think that if you have too many followers, you can't use it right. Or if you have too many people that you're following, it's really an intimate community, actually. And so, it is kind of funny how people want like more exposure, but all those people might not be actually involved in engaging with you. So what's the point? Yeah,
definitely. I agree with that. And I'm curious, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've sort of learned that you could pass on to like newer yoga teachers or teachers who are into their career but looking to streamline a little bit more?
That's a really tough question. I'm going to draw on my kind of experience in the last 300 hour that I did, and maybe I'll kind of give some advice through that. One of our projects in the 300 hour was that everybody had to film a 1 to 2 minute YouTube video and put it up on YouTube. And we did it like at the studio. We helped each other out. We filmed and so everyone had to create a YouTube account and then film a video. And some people made theirs public and some people didn't. They still had to upload it and keep it private, but it was the act of doing it. And it was for 2 reasons. One, to encourage an online presence, because I think that is where it's going today. It really is. And even if you're not really leaving your own community, if you're still kind of teaching in your own, the studio network, I still think people spend time online. And so you can still reach them. You can reach your audience, even when you're, not in your studio. And then the second one is to overcome the fear of being captured, like this. I'm just speaking, and now the whole world is going to hear everything I just said. Yeah. Well, not the whole world, but everyone who listens, they're going to hear everything I just said. And if they disagree with me, they're going to write some mean stuff in the comments. And if they, and it's like, that's okay. If you're going to be trying to market yourself in such a way that you're pleasing everybody, then you're not going to step onto the court. Like you'll be on the sidelines the whole time, because you have to overcome that fear. And I've had my share of comments, unfavorable comments, but I also know that it's like I was talking with my friend, like the people that love what you do, they're just happy, and they just move on. They don't always say how great it was. And then people who don't like it, then they tend to be more verbal. And so it's all okay. Like, don't worry about it. They'll move on and find somebody that they'd rather, be engaged with. So I think it's like, don't be scared to put yourself out there, and don't be scared to be recorded.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice. I know that as somebody who hosts 2 podcasts, it was definitely not easy launching the first one. Like, it was terrifying on so many levels. And especially when we gain traction with it, and then it's like, oh, people are actually listening to this. And you do get people who just have no interest in what you have to say. And it's hard, but it's a good lesson, I think, and it's a good personal growth for the rest of your life. Is there any specific like mediums that you recommend people get online? Like, do you recommend people have a website, getting a newsletter going, YouTube?
Again, I think it's all just dependent on what your brand develops into being. I think, of course, websites are important nowadays. Everybody should have a website. I think, even if you don't have a business, websites are important.
Yeah.
But, I try to direct my audience towards Twitter, because I don't have a lot of time to engage, but I do love to engage. So on Twitter, I can do it in 140 characters or less. I don't have to write a well thought out paragraph. It's like I get email. I have more emails than I can answer. And it's like, I would love to answer these, but it would require a 2-hour email with a background in biomechanics, and I can't do that. Like, while I'm writing a book, that can't happen.
Yeah.
But if you just ask me some small questions on Twitter, I can answer you quickly. But the yoga community is not active on Twitter. So I'm trying to steer them toward Twitter, and they're always on Facebook. And, Facebook for me is more time consuming. And so as a result, I'm not on it as much. And so I think I'm trying to make them fit my business. It's not necessarily working, not successful. So, I think you should just kind of see where you find success. Like some people are successful on Instagram, so just find where you are successful, try them all, and then put your energies into the one that works the best for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good recommendation too, because, some people really love taking photos, and then Instagram is the right medium for them. And some people despise getting their photo taken. And I think when your online presence becomes a chore, that's the time when you should, reconsider, because it's connecting with your community. So it should feel, I think, a little bit more enjoyable to connect with those people. Yeah,
it shouldn't be work. And then just regarding your website, my advice would be to take a weekend course on WordPress or how to do a website. I used to not do my own website because I didn't know websites, and I had hired someone to do it. And I was so frustrated with the effort and the cost that it would take to change a photo, because I'd change my hair color all the time. So I was like, I have to update my website to match my hair color now. And it was so complicated and expensive, and I didn't make any money. So I just got frustrated, and I just said, from now on, I'm going to learn how to do websites. And so I do my own website, and it's great because I can come home from a weekend course, and with 2 clicks, I can remove the course I just taught from my schedule. So my website is always updated. It doesn't take any effort because I'm confident in it, and I can make changes to it if I want to. I know that it's tough, but I think it empowers you to kind of express your brand easily and quickly. Unless you make a ton of money, then by all means hire someone. But I think the payoff or the return on your investment on just learning the basics on a website, on how to run your website, is totally worth it.
Yeah. I think you hit on something pretty key there, and just going back to how big the internet is. I mean, YouTube can walk you all through how to set up WordPress if you've got the time and energies for it, taking some notes down. People will walk you through how to get a hosting site, how to set up a theme.
There's groups on Facebook that you can, WordPress groups that you can go in and punch in a question. I got hacked recently, and my website was down, and I went in there and was like, help, I got hacked. I don't even know what to do. And hundreds of people responded with different plugins I could add. There's so much help out there. So yeah, maybe not enroll in a weekend course or whatever, but set aside a weekend or something, a couple days to really commit to it. And I promise you it'll be worth it.
Totally. I think that's fabulous advice. And getting into your book, you've released one book already, right?
No, I have not released a book. I'm in contract to deliver a manuscript in May 2017.
Amazing. What has that process been like?
Painful. Very painful. It's a slow process. When I wrote my master's thesis, that was kind of like writing a book, but and I just kind of know it's painful and slow. The hardest thing about getting the book done is really finding large blocks of time to write. It's not something that I can do in an hour between clients, and so I'm constantly trying to rearrange my schedule so that I have a 6-7 hour window so that I can work. So that's really the hardest part. And then of course, wondering if everyone's going to hate what you have to say. That's the other part, but you have to kind of get over that as well. I do feel really blessed that I get to teach the content that's in my book every weekend to real people. So it's like getting real-time feedback. So that is really nice. The layout of the book over the last year has already evolved completely because I get to share it with people and see what works, what needs more, what needs less, what order is better. Mm-hmm. And so that's really a great gift that I don't know that all writers are awarded that gift. So I'm really grateful for that. But it's long and slow.
Yeah, it's something that is, I don't know, kind of been like a bucket list item, little girl dream that I've always had. And I feel like I love to write, but when it comes to actually writing something that's not just a blog post, it's just so frustrating. And again, the internet, it's just this deep hole that I'll just dig myself down into. And then I'm like, I've spent an hour on Facebook and I've done nothing.
There's actually, there's a site that I used to use. It's actually not a site. It's like a plugin or a add-on or whatever, extension. That's what it's called for Google Chrome. It's called Google Nanny. And so you can have a nanny control what you do on the internet. And so when I was writing the first time around, that's what I did. I basically put Facebook on there and a couple other blogs I follow, and you'll get locked out. You can set the parameters, the hours, how much time, whatever. And so I'd be writing and I would suddenly be looking at a window that would say, shouldn't you be working? And it's because I had gone to Facebook and not even known that I was doing it. And so it was like, oh, okay, I guess so. And you can still get in, but you have to like type in a 64-digit code that you can't copy and paste. So it's like for a Facebook emergency, you can get in. But I kept it on my computer for about a year and a half, and it totally transformed my social media habits. I don't have Facebook on my phone. And so now I took it off, but I don't go to social media the way I used to because I'm so conditioned to not do it during certain hours. So that would be another piece of advice for anyone trying to create content that requires focus. That's what I would do.
Yeah, I love that. I made a note of that. I think I'm going to download that right after we get off.
It's awesome. It's really awesome.
Yeah, I find that I don't have the personal discipline, and then I'll justify it by going on, my MBO page or my other podcast page, and I'm like, I'm doing work. Mm-hmm. Am I doing work?
Yeah, you're not.
No. I'm just wasting time and avoiding the things that I actually need to get done. And so in terms of your book, what is the actual structure of the book? Is it more of a tool that people can use in other teacher trainings, or is it more of something?
Yes. It's called Yoga Biomechanics, Redefining Stretching. So it's basically it's a course in biomechanics for yoga teachers, so that it doesn't read like a textbook. Cool. And then because textbooks and biomechanics are really boring, and then there'll be lots of application and et cetera, lots of photos. But it is all research-based. So my publisher is Handspring Publishing, and they do, they publish mostly works that are researched. So I will be obligated to cite current research within the last 5 years. So it's a little bit of background and application, and then lots and lots of science. Like, this is what this researcher found, and this is what this researcher found.
Yeah. I think that's really cool, and it sounds like it's something that's, kind of hasn't been explored in the yoga industry. Yeah, I agree. That's why I got a publishing contract. Yeah. They were like, we think we need that. I was like, yeah, I think we need that too. Where do I sign? Yeah. Something that I really liked about your website and that, drew me to reach out to you was I was like, wow, I've talked to a lot of people who are interested in movement, and they kind of use the word yoga as a way to get people to come to class, and then they teach them more how to move than they actually teach them through traditional asanas. But I love how you're doing something that's even more streamlined than that. Oh, thank you. Yeah, no worries at all. Do you have any hopes or dreams for the future about where the book is sort of going to take your teacher training, maybe other teacher trainings? I just want it done. I want to be on the other side of it. Right now, that's all I can see. I just want to. I don't even need it. I don't even need it. I just want to submit the manuscript so that they can edit it. So it's on their plate. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to that. But for the most part, I plan on using it as a manual in my teacher training. So that's because manuals are also a lot of work, especially if you do all original artwork, which is you should be doing. You shouldn't be borrowing artwork from the internet, so content and all of that. It's a ton of work. So I will have kind of a built-in manual, and that I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, that's really cool. And what lessons have you learned through this book writing process while being a yoga teacher, yoga educator? I think the biggest lesson I've learned is that you have to
it's actually a lesson that I teach in yoga asana as well. You have to give up something to get something else. And sometimes we say that in asana, like you have to give up, you have to give up lower back mobility to get hip mobility or something like that. You know what I mean? You have to sometimes choose what you can work with. And with writing, I've been really struggling. I've been not wanting to give up my private clients, but there's just no time, so you have to give up one passion sometimes to get another. And there's enough time in life, hopefully, to come back around and pick up what you left behind temporarily.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good business lesson in general. I know it's something that I've struggled with basically my entire adult life, is kind of wanting to do a lot of things and being like, there's not enough time to do it all.
Yeah.
And knowing that things will kind of come back, I guess, as they're meant to, and you can pick things up later on in life and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. I want to be mindful of your time. I just have one more question for you.
Okay.
And it's based on what you've learned throughout your career, what advice would you tell somebody, or what advice would you tell yourself when you first started teaching? So what advice would you tell somebody who's new out of a training or within their first couple of years of teaching, who's wanting to be a career yoga teacher?
I think it would be similar to what I just said, that you don't have to and you can't do it all at once. I think that's what I wanted to do, everything at once. In fact, my very first studio class, I had taught little other places. My very first studio class that I taught, I think I taught every single asana I knew in an hour. They were up, down, up, down. I was like, look, I can give it all to you. And so I think that's very reflective of what I wanted out of my career. I think there's a lot to, that's take some time, reflect back on what happened in your first, very first yoga class that you taught. What did you do? And learn from that, pull back and analyze that for yourself and say, what does that say about me? And how can I make this a strength? Another one of my friends, her first class, she ended 40 minutes early. She was out of time. She's like, oh no. And we're Shavasana. Whoa, what just happened? So, and none of it's wrong. Just what does that say and what can you learn from that?
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I know something that I found in the first few classes I taught was kind of planning sequences and struggling to come up with things. And then as soon as the creative process started, it's all this stuff was just mind dumping. I was oh, and I know this pose and this could go after this, and this would be cool sequence together. And then it's just take a breath. We don't need to do every single back bend in the yoga asana manual.
Or should you?
No.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think that's a really good recommendation. And I feel I tend to be more on the side of you where I'm I know even only being a little bit into my career, it's reminding myself to be patient and that it'll all come with time. And
yeah.
Do you have any advice for, I know I said last question and this will be the last one, just curious about if you have any advice for people who want more education. Do you think that just doing the educational programs that sort of draw people in that moment is how to do that?
I think that's a really good question. I think you have to really think about what you want to learn and then go out and seek it. I had to go outside of yoga to learn what I wanted to learn. Mm-hmm. And that's not a bad thing. It's just I wanted to really understand the mechanics behind stretching and what stretching did in the short term and the long term and how it worked. And that wasn't, there were no courses in yoga that taught that. That for me took, 3-year graduate program. Even my advisors were like, wow, we didn't know any of this, unless it's what you focus on. It's not something, you kind of get glossed over one day somewhere.
Yeah.
So I think it's I'm not saying you can't get your education in yoga. You absolutely can. I'm just saying really be clear on what it is that you want and then go out and find it. And that might mean traveling. That might mean, if there's a teacher that you really like, trying to get them to your studio, or that might be, taking a college course and get advice. Like I know in my, in the 300 hour, we had one girl that really didn't have a strong anatomy background. And she was like, I really think I should go and take an anatomy course at the university before I finish this program because I need to learn more. And I was like, well, what is it that you want to get out of your anatomy course? Like the language that we're using here where we're talking about bones and muscles and joints, like if you're feeling deficient in that, don't go take an anatomy course at the university because you do bones one day and muscles the next and you move on because it includes every other system in the body. You're going to learn, blood cells. You're going to learn. So like if you think that a 16-week university course in anatomy is going to translate into yoga asana, you might rather spend a weekend doing an online anatomy course or studying an anatomy book and memorizing some of this stuff, and so don't waste your time. Be efficient with your education and get advice from people who've taken it already and like find out if it suits your needs so you don't just spend a lot of time and money on excess education.
Awesome. I love that. I think that that's really good advice. Cool. Where can people find more about you?
My website, which is julesmitchell.com. So it's JulesMitchell. That everything is on there. I do teach my online classes on Udaya, and that's udaya.com. It's actually Udaya if you want to say it in Sanskrit, but everyone else just calls it Udaya. It's like saying asana or asana, so technically Udaya. And then I also have some classes on Yoga Anytime. And if you go to my website, there's discount codes and all that kind of stuff, and also my workshop schedule. I'm all over the North America, including Canada, for the next year. So you can pretty much find me on any coast in any region.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It was super fun.
Yeah, of course. So hopefully everyone enjoyed that interview with Jules Mitchell. I know I learned so much from her. I didn't really know much about biomechanics before this episode. So super cool to learn about that and a little bit more about mobility and movement in terms of being a yoga teacher. If anyone has any questions, comments, or feedback, or just wants to reach out and say hi, definitely send me an email at info@mbomyoga.com. You can connect on Facebook at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And to find show notes and more information from this episode, as well as other episodes and all the latest blog posts, you can visit www.mbomyoga.com. And if you want to connect on Twitter and Instagram, you can follow my personal page, Amanda Kingsmith. It's pretty yoga focused. So lots of updates about my yoga teaching and my yoga life and everything I'm learning through MBOM. And as always, thanks so much for listening, and namaste.